We're going to move over to talk about the Buddhist theory of karma today. I'll do a little bit of introduction on Buddhist philosophy. My area of research is Buddhist philosophy, so if I start just going on and on, stop me. I get quite excited. I get quite excited when it's not Buddhist philosophy. With Buddhist philosophy, it's really dangerous. I might just, keep going. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Buddhist tradition, which is not really on the handout, but just for your general knowledge. And then we will talk about the Buddhist theory of karma today. Hopefully by today we'll finish most of it, but there might be a little bit left over for next week. And then we'll combine it with looking at the Charvak, or the materialist ethics in India, next week, if there's leftover stuff. If I can't help myself, we shall see. Okay, so let me start talking about, as you know, the Buddhist philosophy started kind of, if you like, after the death of Buddha. After the death of Buddha in about 5th century BC, Buddhism started spreading in India. It started gaining momentum while he was alive. And what it was really doing, as I've said before, is questioning the Hindu doctrines. So the best period of Indian philosophy happens. So Buddhism develops in India after, the death of Buddha, where there is a serious competition for, resources, for followers amongst the Hindus and the Buddhists. And just like the Hindus, what you get in terms of Buddhist scriptures, if you like, or texts, if you like, the original texts, you get the Buddhist dialogues. So the Buddha was never, hoping to have a school of philosophy or sitting down and doing a formal teaching. Buddhism is more a practical religion. The main aim of Buddhism, if you like, it can be put in a single sentence: how to reduce suffering in the world. The aim of Buddhism is to reduce suffering in the world. And we'll get to the Four Noble Truths, which really give you a sense of what the Buddha means by suffering. So the Buddha was not interested in having, a school or a formal metaphysics or epistemology. So his teaching was mostly in the form of dialogue. So he went around talking to people, giving lectures and interacting with people. And the Buddhist texts, unlike the Hindu sutras, which you've looked at we've looked at together in the last 2 weeks, are not, little aphoristic statements which you really can't make sense of. In the Buddhist dialogues, you will see in your texts, in the reprinted texts, you have 2 texts from the Buddhist dialogues. Those are the original dialogues of the Buddha, written down by his students, and of course now translated into English. So we look at 2 texts. One is called the Milindapanha, which is a dialogue with a king. Many of the Indian kings converted to Buddhism. And, that was also fighting for a political space. Buddhism also fought for the political space. So this is one of the dialogues one of the Buddhist saints is having with an Indian king. So that's one of your texts, which is called Milindapanha. You will see that's King Milinda, and Panha is having a dialogue. The other text is Vishuddhi Marga, which means the path of purification. And there are some excerpts from that also. So you will see in the text, it is not cryptic sutras. Rather, what you get in the text is lots of examples, lots and lots of analogies to explain, what is going on. Because the doctrines are not easy the Buddhist doctrines are not easy to understand. And what you get in the text is examples and analogies. If any of you have looked at the text, and we'll get to some of them later today, you see a lot of examples and analogies trying to explain what might be said here. So the texts are not difficult to understand. The religion is a very practical one. So what happened after, these sort of dialogues, the ones you have reprinted in the reader for this unit, what happened after that is that the Hindus pushed the Buddhists into, you know, it's not good enough to talk in terms of analogies. You have to come up with a proper metaphysics, a proper epistemology, you know, what is there in the world, how do we find out, or how do we know about it? Those questions have to be answered. So later on, Buddhist philosophy also becomes very scholastic. So later on, when it goes in India in the 5th, you know, from about the 5th century BC to, as I said, about the 10th century AD, it continued for a long time, flourishing in India. But that's when you get a lot of metaphysics, a lot of epistemology, and it also becomes quite technical. But the early dialogues are a real pleasure to read. I say a real pleasure to read. Whether they're philosophically satisfying or not is something I'd like to hear from you. You know, because what you get is examples and analogies. You don't really get arguments. You know, do the examples and the analogies do the work of an argument? They help to get the point across, but that leaves open the question, why should we believe it? Okay, you understand the doctrine, but then you still want to know, well, why should I believe it? And that question, you know, remains open. I will talk about some of the arguments in later classes, especially when we do the metaphysics. But today, you know, we'll focus on the theory of karma and just talk about what is there in the text. So, 4 things to say. You know, the character of the text is very different here. The main aim of Buddhist philosophy is very different. It's meant as, you know, a teaching for all. They are not like the Hindus saying only the Brahmins can come into the schools and join and find about the Vedas. You know, it's not that kind of elitism, if you like. The Buddha wants to reduce the suffering of one and all in the world. So it's not, you know, focused or difficult in that sense that it can only be followed if you have the tutelage of a teacher, you know, over many years. It's not that kind of philosophy, as you will see. Okay, but before, any questions about this bit? And you know, Buddhism is not one single tradition. What I teach you in this course is the texts, you know, the starting texts of Buddhism. Buddhism spread all across the world. So from India, it went right up to Japan in the east, and even up to Afghanistan, to now what is Afghanistan. That was all part of India in those times. So it, you know, it became very many different schools. It got intertwined into the various cultures. So what do you see in these texts? Some of you who might be familiar with, you know, say Zen Buddhism or something, it's very, very different. But you can appreciate why it became different is because it traveled, and you know, no religion or no philosophy travels without getting integrated. Once it gets integrated into local cultures, it changes its character. It changes its character as it goes from one place to another. So you have Chinese Buddhism, you have Taiwanese Buddhism, you have a different Buddhism in Tibet, and so on and so forth. So there are many strands of Buddhism. There's not just one strand of Buddhism, but all of the strands, no matter what, you know, right up to Zen. So there's traditions in India, then there's traditions, well, the traditions were in India, but there's living traditions in Sri Lanka that traveled, you know, all into Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Bali, Malaysia, and so on. And those also took very different forms from what was the original Buddhist ideas. But all of them, no matter how far it went, all of them use these texts as the source text. You know, they're always saying our interpretation is meant to be, you know, the most authentic interpretation of the text, of the original scriptures. They also call them sutras, even though they're not in the form of sutras, but just because of the Hindu sutras. So they call them sutras, and they say we are, you know, the true upholders of the sutra. So realize that everyone, even though, you know, the philosophy changes its character, everyone is very keen to prove their authenticity by referring to these to these very initial texts. So they're very important texts in the Buddhist tradition, you know, even though they might be the earliest texts and not as sophisticated as some of the later stuff. They're very important texts in the tradition. Everyone goes back to these texts and says, look, this is what the Buddha says. Look, this is what the Buddha says. This is what he meant by this. And so the changes are all, you know, sort of, the changes that happen are all justified by trying to interpret these very texts that you have in the study guide here. Okay. Before we get into, you know, the Buddhist ethics, we have to talk a little bit about Buddhist metaphysics. Just to give you the background, you know, we did talk about the soul hypothesis, though not in detail, and we haven't seen the arguments for it as yet. When we talked about the Hindu tradition, the Buddhist view depends on three important metaphysical doctrines. In order to understand their theory of karma or their version of the theory of karma, you need to sort of grasp or have some sense of three important Buddhist, oops, this is the bad thing, I forget about it once I leave this. Three important metaphysical doctrines which I have put on the handout. One is the doctrine of no self, that there is no self at all. By this, what they mean, it's difficult to explain what they mean, but let me try. And, you know, sort of this is one idea which you have to, so to say, keep on hold for now. Even if you don't fully grasp it, I hope by the end of the course, when we return to Buddhist metaphysics, you will fully grasp this idea. So the first important doctrine, and this is common to all Buddhist traditions, no matter where, they all uphold the doctrine of no self. There's two versions of the doctrines of no self. One is just saying it denies the Hindu idea of there being a soul substance. The Buddhists say that the mental and the physical stuff is all there is to making a person, you know, what they are. We are nothing more, according to them, we are nothing more than a bundle of physical and mental states. And this bundle of physical and mental states is constantly changing. So just think about it. We know that, you know, all physical cells in the body change over a period of time. Every moment, at least, you know, one or more than one, I'd guess, physical cells are dying in your body and being replaced by new cells in different parts of the body. So the physical organism is something that is renewing itself, you know, almost all the time, even though we might not notice the changes. But that's not just true of the physical organism. The mind is also changing itself. You know, just concentrate, if you will, on your thoughts for a moment, and you will notice that there are so many different things going through your head. There are so many different things going through your head, right? Different thoughts come, different thoughts leave your head. The mental states are always changing. You know, your beliefs are changing, your desires are changing. Doing this course, you've learned a few new facts. You have a few new beliefs about what Indian philosophy is all about. You know, my saying things, trying to grasp the doctrine of no self. So one version of the doctrine, one, you know, I think most popular version of the doctrine just says that a person is nothing more than a bundle of mental and physical states which are always changing. One of the texts puts it like this, you know, a person lasts as long as a thought lasts. So that's as long as a person lasts, not more than that. Different thought, different mental state, different composition. You know, different composition of physical and mental states. Not everything needs to change, but the bundle is not the same anymore. So think, you know, of a bundle of physical and mental states. Some physical states and some mental states change, replaced by another bundle, replaced by another bundle, replaced by another bundle. So in fact, you know, to think that what the Buddhists are denying is just the soul hypothesis, is the Hindu doctrine that, you know, the soul continues to be the same within a lifetime and over lifetime, and mental and physical states might be changing, but, you know, what makes us the same person over time, what accounts for continuity over time is, you know, that there is a soul substance underlying this. Now, the Buddhists question that, but that's not the only thing they question. Notice that the Buddhists are also questioning your everyday idea of what it is to be a person. We all think of ourselves as continuing beings, don't we? Otherwise, what would be the point of celebrating your birthday? You know, you might as well be celebrating someone else's birthday. If it is not the same person who was born, you know, in your case, 18 or 19 or 20 years ago, why would you go on celebrating that being's birthday? Sure, you know, there's very many different mental and physical states, and of course, you know, none of us thinks that, you know, we're the same as we were when we were 3. But our ordinary conception of what it is to be the same person over time, or what it is to continue to exist over time, has this idea built into it that there is something that continues to exist. You know, even though you might think from what you were at 3 and what you are now, just think about 2, you know, time slices, if you like, of yourself. There might be nothing. All the physical cells in the body might have changed. All the mental states, the beliefs you had, the desires you had, the thoughts you had when you were 3, and the beliefs and the desires and the thoughts that you have now have radically changed, right? Everyone agrees? It's a completely new mental being, if you like, a completely new physical being. I hope I'm right. I'm sure biology would confirm it. Then the Buddhists think, what's the big deal? Why do you think it's the same person? What makes you think it's the same person? If mental and physical states are all there is, and you all just agreed with me that mental and physical states change over time, so what's the big deal about thinking? What is the reason that we think we are the same person over time? Any reasons you might think of? Does everyone agree with me that there is no physical and mental, you know, sameness over, I mean, if you're not convinced it might happen in between, you know, 3 and 19 or whatever you are, think about me. Yeah, really, nothing remains of that 3-year-old. I'm so old now. So what might be the reason for thinking it's the same person? Yeah, the Buddhists would agree with that idea, and that's exactly, you know, if I ever get to number 3 on the metaphysical doctrine, that's their doctrine of dependent origination. The present state of being depends on the past state of being, and depends on the past state of being, and that's what, you know, accounts for the continuity over time. But the Buddhist does want to challenge the idea that, you know, and listen to this carefully, the Buddhist does want to challenge the idea that you are not the same person. Same means being identical, right? Being identical to that being. We have to give up this notion of being the same over time. We have to give up this notion of identity. And the way the Buddhist, and this is the most important point, the way the Buddhist makes you realize, if causal relations are all that account for continuity over time, if causal relations are all that account for continuity over time, and that is enough to satisfy you, yes, you know, I am in some sense, you know, maybe not identical, but in some sense the same as that person at 3 or that being at 3, if that is enough to convince you of that, what about causal relations with other beings around you? I mean, right now we are interacting, right? The noises I'm making is causing mental states in your head. Right? It's making you think, making you write. It's my actions or my words are causing things in you. making some people think, making some people write, making some people wonder why she goes on and on like this. But the important Buddhist point is this, that the kind of relation you have to your past self, and in fact the future self, is exactly the kind of relation you have to other beings around you. You don't consider yourself identical with me, then why would you consider yourself identical with that being in the past? What is the connection? Causal connection. But I just told you there's a causal connection here. We have a very strong causal connection with our parents. Do we consider ourselves identical with our parents? We have causal connections with our friends, very intimate ones. You know, they influence our beliefs, desires in very important ways. Do we consider them to be identical with us? No. Then why do we have so much invested? The Buddhist asks. And this is the most important point, most important teaching of Buddhist philosophy. Give up on the notion of identity. Give up on the notion of sameness. And the result of that will be, with identity goes self-interest. If you realize that the kind of relation that you have to your former self and to your future self is exactly the same kind of relation that you have to other beings around you, exactly the same kind of relation that you have to other beings around you, then self-interest should be replaced by compassion for beings interested in other beings. You know, why are we interested in that future self? We put away money for the future self. You know, we want the future self to get good mark. You know, we do all sorts of things for that future self. But what kind of relation does that future self have to you? Now, the only relation it has, or the kind of relation the Buddha says it has, is the relation that you have with me. You know, the stranger called Monima, who's teaching you for a semester. And that's exactly the Buddhist point. If you realize this truth and give up on the notion of identity, give up on the notion of being the same, and when you just think in terms of causal continuity, then you realize you're causally continuous with lots of beings around you. The notion of self-interest gets replaced by compassion. And the result of that, of course, the Buddhists will say, will be a reduction in suffering. You know, if we were all more compassionate, of course there'd be. The Buddhist hope is, and I think, you know, there's some reason to hope that it's right, it's because we are all self-interested, we cause so much suffering to ourselves, and we cause so much suffering to others. Once we realize this truth, so I think, and this is, you know, not everyone in the contemporary literature agrees on this. I think what the Buddhist is questioning is not just the Hindu idea that there is a continuing soul substance that continues to exist over time. I think the Buddhist is also attacking at the same time every ordinary person's conception of what it is to be the same person over time. Questioning that and saying there is something wrong with what you believe about identity over time. It's a very radical shift. I call it a paradigm shift. It's a very radical shift in the way we think about ourselves. The no-self doctrine is one of the most, you know, intriguing ideas in the Buddhist philosophy. Any questions about that before I move on? Do people get the sense of what I'm suggesting? It's not just questioning the soul hypothesis. It's going much deeper than that. It's questioning the ordinary person's conception, denying that there's anything like identity over time. And this is for all beings, not just for persons, for animals, for everything. Nothing exists for more than a moment. That's what the Buddhists say. You know, the doctrine, the second sort of metaphysical doctrine is just this one, momentariness. Everything exists only momentarily, so we should not invest, you know, either in ourselves or in other things. Any questions? Everyone grasped it? Yeah? Pretty radical? Radical idea? Interesting idea, worth considering. The Buddhist, this is my interpretation, that the Buddhist is just questioning the notion of identity, full stop. That's the second doctrine of momentariness, that everything is impermanent, nothing continues to exist for more than a period of time. And one of the reasons, relating it to the ethics, one of the reasons is that we suffer is because we take what is impermanent to be permanent. And things change, persons change, things go out of existence, we change, and all that causes suffering and causes desire because we are hankering for that very same thing. We are deluded, the Buddhist says, that, you want that, but that thing, nor you, continues to be the same over time. So impermanence is, or momentariness is the metaphysical fact, but we are confused about it. We take things to be permanent. That causes desire, that causes suffering. How you sort of suffer when one of your best friends changes and you say they're no longer the same person. And that causes a lot of suffering. But if you just shrugged your shoulders and said, that's just a metaphysical fact about the world, the way the world is. No person is the same over time. That will reduce suffering. So says the Buddhist. I'm not saying it will, but I just said so says the Buddhist. The third idea is just the idea of, causal conditioning, what they call the doctrine of dependent origination, that everything that comes into existence has causes in the past and causes other things in the future. That's what it is to be real. To be real is not to be this uncaused first cause of everything or something like that. To be real is to have a cause and to cause something, and exist for a moment, cause something, and get out of existence. So if you like, you can think of the Buddhist universe, and I'll stop talking about the Buddhist metaphysics in a minute. I just want to give you a picture to keep in mind as to what the Buddhist world looks like. So what you have in the Buddhist world, if you like, are bundles of physical and mental states, bundles of just physical states, just all these bundles, connected by causal relations. Many bundles. Some bundles are connected more closely, like the monomer that walked in, and the monomer that is in front of you now, and the monomer that will leave at about 12. Those bundles are more closely connected with causal relations, but then there are all these other bundles that I'm also closely connected with, and so are you closely connected with. So there are, according to the Buddhists, when they say no self, I'm back on the no self. When the Buddhist says there's no self, you have to think there's just bundles of mental and physical states which are always changing, and they're connected by causal relations. But, there are no persons. Saying that this bundle over time, for me, when I was born, X number of years ago, I better not reveal my age, to when I will die, that is just an arbitrary way of, thinking about this person as monomer. Really, the kind of relations I have with this extended thing are also the kinds of relations I have with beings all around me, my parents, my friends, my students, my colleagues, so on and so forth. So there are, according to the Buddhists, there are really no persons, and you will find that statement in the Buddhist texts. We will see there are no persons to be found here. That's exactly what they mean by saying there are no persons. There are physical and mental states, bundles of physical and mental states. There are bundles of physical states bound together by causal relations. That's all there is in the universe. No special things carved out as monomer and Ros and so on and so forth. That's, the picture to keep in mind Physical and mental states bound together by causal relations going in all directions, future, past, and across so-called people. Any questions? Let's move on to the Four Noble Truths. So that's the, if you like, the central defining doctrine of the Buddhists. Any Buddhist textbook that you open up, the first thing it'll start with is telling you the Four Noble Truths. What are the Four Noble Truths? Anyone know? Don't look at the handout because they're there. Anyone know what the Four Noble Truths are? No? Very, very simple. So the first truth is there is suffering in the world. The second truth, I mean, this is the beauty of Buddhist philosophy. It's so simple, but difficult, deep ideas, but very simple on the surface. So let me just say the Four Noble Truths, and I'll explain them in a moment. There is suffering in the world. Suffering has a cause. Suffering can be removed by removing its causes. If you take away the cause of something, suffering can be removed. Number 3. Number 4, the way to remove the causes of suffering is by following the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path includes correct intention, correct meditation, correct conduct, and so on and so forth. Very simple. There's suffering in the world, suffering has a cause. The cause of suffering can be removed by removing its causes. The way to get rid of the causes of suffering is by following the Eightfold Path. And they've got correct knowledge, correct view, correct meditation, correct, very simple idea. The first thought there, there is suffering in the world. The first idea there, it's talking about, suffering as being an existential fact. Suffering is not something that we can avoid. It's not talking about your suffering or my suffering. It is talking about, there is suffering everywhere in the world. That's back to the Hindu idea. All existence is bound up with suffering. We cannot exist without suffering. So it's not thinking about, from the perspective of my life or your life that, I'm suffering because I would like this paper finished, I would like, X done, and so on and so forth. It is a fact, if you like, of life. It's a fact of existence, and it is a reflection. And suffering is a reflection of the impermanence of things. It's because things are impermanent that we suffer, because, of course, we take them to be permanent. So it's this mismatch between the nature of the world and what we take it to be that is, is the reason for suffering. Because of the impermanent nature of things, and because of, us taking ourselves to be this being that continues to exist, over time, they say the causes of suffering are all sort of based. The most important delusion, according to the Buddhist, is to get rid of the self, to get rid of the personhood, because that's the cause of suffering. So it's the ego. It's the egocentric attachment. It's the egocentric aversions. I want this. I don't want that. That's the root cause of suffering. And this attachment, to things, I want this and I don't want that, that is caused by ignorance, because we are really not, we are really ignorant about the nature of the world. Think about it for a moment. If persons are just reduced to, or if you are just reduced to a bundle of mental and physical state, existing for a moment of time, existing just for a moment, and all things around you and all beings around you exist only momentarily, is there any reason to have any desires? Does it make any sense to have any desires? What does the term I, when you talk about yourself using the term I, what does it refer to then? What does it talk about? Is there any, does it seem, if So I've done this reduction. I've reduced all of you to bundles of physical and mental states with nothing more, and bundles of physical and mental states which will be replaced by a new bundle at the very next moment, right? And a new bundle and a new bundle. However, we say how long a moment is, and we'll get to that. The Buddhists have views about that as well. But tell me, is there any reason then to desire anything? Yeah?
But when we feel pain or joy, like we have a very strong connection to that, and no one else feels what we feel. So that's where the big distinction is.
Okay, so
Me and everyone else.
you're questioning the Buddhist idea by thinking about, the Buddhist idea can't be right, because when it's my pain or my joy, I feel it in a special way that no other bundle does. This is now questioning the Buddhist idea. I have a special connection, and it's a very good point. I have a special connection to myself that no one else can feel my pain or feel my joy or share my joy. My friends can share my joy, but they can't feel it in the same kind of way that I do internally, sense it.
When we have desires, we want to get away from our pain.
Yeah,
We want to get closer to our joy.
yeah,
That's where we have desires.
yeah. And you think there's, because of this special connection, it makes sense to have desire because of this special way or special access that I have to my own pain and my own pleasure. Anyone who's in pain has the desire to reduce that pain or get rid of it, and has the desire to, have more of the things that they enjoy or that give them joy. Yep, good. We'll come to that, yeah.
I was going to say, the desire is still, it's a future. So in that moment, even if you're desiring it, you don't have it in that moment. So you're projecting into the future. So if you're constantly changing yourself in that future moment, you're thinking of your future self. So it's not consistent with that idea that you're constantly changing. So I guess theoretically you shouldn't even be thinking about your future self, so you shouldn't be desiring anything because it is for your future self.
Yeah. You shouldn't be desiring anything, but, the fact is that we do.
Yeah.
The fact is that we do, and how come the Buddha says the point of desire goes away. If there's no self, if there's no person, the point of desire goes away. But the fact is that we keep desiring. So how do we explain that? Yeah?
Oh, no, I was
Okay. You had any other questions or concerns about this picture? So to come back to this point, I think, the Buddhists have, a big problem trying to explain, what happens to this notion, if you like, a subject of experience. There is a subject of experience. There are not pains floating around. There are not, pleasures, mental states floating around. There's someone that feels the pain. There's someone that feels the joy, so to say, from the inside. So when we think about mental states, when we think about pains and joys, we always think of these states as belonging to a subject, If I said to you, there's a bit of pain floating around there, that just doesn't make sense. What is she talking about, right? You always think of pain and pleasure as belonging to a subject. There's a notion, in order to make sense of, this is how, some philosophers would put it, that, it's completely incoherent to talk about pain without being pain of a subject. And so if the Buddhist has no self, if there's just mental and physical states changing over time, then there is no notion of a subject of experience. And here's what and we're getting into intricate metaphysics, but that's all right. It's good for your mental muscles. The Buddhist response to this idea is to say, think very carefully about whether there is someone who does the experiencing. You know, why can't pain just be a mental state in this bundle? So a certain mental state, I mean, think about an anxiety. You know, that's a painful experience. If someone is suffering from anxiety, think about, you know, people who suffer from anxiety. It completely, you know, makes them unable to function physically, unable to concentrate. You know, their physical and mental states don't work. But the Buddhist is saying it's just this bundle of physical and mental states interacting. That anxiety is caused by something and causes something. Why do we need? Anxiety in itself is a state, which is a conscious state. That's all there is. What we sort of, you know, if you like, cook up a subject or cook up an agent of action. We cook up these ideas, but really what this is, you know, is just physical and mental states interacting with each other. One physical, what we call experiencing pain, is perhaps a mental state making you, you know, physically disabled to do anything. If I had, you know, a terrible pain in my knee, I could not concentrate on what I was saying. That's what it is to experience pain. It affects other causal state. It has causal effects on, you know, this bundle. There's nothing over and above the mental and physical states. So making sense of pain, making sense of pleasure, is just making sense of this physical and mental states interacting with each other without this notion of something over and above that is doing the experiencing of the pain. You know, it is your physical state and your mental state are causally connected, right? I can see your pain can affect me, I can feel empathy for you. If someone says, you know, their knees don't work, at my age, I really know what it means because I can't come downstairs. I can go up the stairs, but if I walk down 6 floors, my knees start hurting. You wouldn't know what that means, but, you know, at my age, we know what that means. So, you know, I can feel empathy for someone who tells me that, so your pain can have an effect on me. But it has a more intimate effect on you because it's intimately connected with your other physical states, which, because of that causal interaction, you know, change their character. And that's what it is, you know, to think that it is me who's feeling the pain. It's just, you know, this more intimate bundle, so to say. Your mental states, you know, can cause other mental states in me, but they probably can't, you know, sort of have physical effects on me. They might. I might, if I was, you know, such a compassionate person, I might drown in someone else's sorrow. We usually don't, but, you know, there can be instances you feel so bad for someone. You feel, you know, you've lost something when you hear about their loss. And, you know, that is what it is. So is that a good enough explanation? It's the intimate connection between mental and physical states and the way they are bound up. That's what explains what it is to experience things. You know, so here's an example from the Buddhist text, not one of the texts that's here in your readings, but here's what they say. You know, they give this example. Why should we posit the notion of self or person as an agent of action? You know, why do we need that kind of idea? They say, just think about action. You see a mango. The Buddhists were big on mangoes. So you see a mango. There's a causal interaction with that food in the shop. You're someone who's enjoyed the taste of mangoes in the past, that, you know, sort of seeing a mango triggers some memories in your head, some mental states, triggers mental states in your head, memories. You remember the pleasant taste of the mango in the past, so that causes a desire for mango. Another mental state, that mental state makes you, you know, the desire makes you work, exert physical pressure, get the money out of your wallet and pay for the mango and get it and satisfy your desire. Where's the person? There's mental and physical states doing all the work. If you posit the notion of person, if you posit the notion of self, the Buddhists say it's causally inefficacious. Doesn't do any work. We told you, to be real, you must be caused by something, and you must cause something. The notion of self doesn't do any work in explaining action. I just explained how the action of eating a mango is caused. It's caused by mental states, first a state of perceiving, then a memory state, then a state of desire, then some physical states. That desire causes some physical states to move, and that causes you to buy the mango and finally satisfy your desire. Where's the self? The Buddhist says.
I guess that kind of makes sense when thinking of desires.
Yeah.
Quite automatic, in the sense that you should be affected by memories and desires. But if you think about someone philosophizing or someone who's sitting down and thinking about that, it'd be a lot harder to take the self out of that person. It's not just being affected by mental states in an unconscious manner in the same way that you just want to manage it. You would actively change the mental states. And there's something that is changing by the mental states, and that's the thing.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Would someone like to come in and defend the Buddhists, against that kind of worry? So imagine it's not, so he's using this example of sitting down and philosophizing, where something is changing. There's not really desires, nothing affecting you. You're just sitting and thinking about things. That's the idea. And, things are so contemplating, or whatever it is, intellectualizing, however you like to think about it, meditating on ideas, use the Buddhist. What's going on? Can that be explained with the Buddhist picture, or do I need to posit a self or a person to explain what might be going on? Any suggestions? Do I need to posit a self to explain this activity? Nothing affecting me. I'm just, after the Indian philosophy class, I sit and meditate or sit and think about what I did well and what I did badly, and, what I could have done better, so on and so forth. That kind of spontaneous thinking, we all do. Can the Buddhist explain it? Should that be a problem for the Buddhist? Yes? No? Yeah?
They'll just reduce it to mental state again. That's what I think.
Yeah, absolutely right. That's exactly what they will do. They'll reduce it to other mental states. They'll say, you might think there is no connection, but it's really, what was happening in class, that, there are some mental states on a core. Not all mental states are always conscious. Some mental states, the Buddhists have, different levels of consciousness. Not all states are at the forefront of your mind. Something might not be at the forefront of your mind, but they can still do some causings. Some of the things, are caused by things that we might not even realize that we are thinking about X, and suddenly a thought comes into mind. It doesn't pop out of nowhere. The Buddhists say there are causes in your conscious life. They're just causes at a different level of consciousness. You might think, I'm trying to listen to Monima, and where did this thought of, what I'm going to do at 12 o'clock come into my head? I'm not even thinking about it. Well, at some level, you must be thinking about anticipating something nice at 12, or, really feeling bad that the lecture is actually over because you wanted to continue forever. I don't know, but, that kind of anticipation. Thoughts come out of, we sometimes say thoughts come into our head out of nowhere. There's no explanation. There must be, like you were saying, there must be an independent agent inside me somewhere who's thinking up these things. No, I think, the Buddhists can give you a more complicated mental story to explain that kind of intellectualizing or philosophizing or whatever you call it. I don't think the Buddhist needs to posit a self to do that. Any other? Yeah?
So not on stage, we, but our bundle of states, are they free at any point? Are they free to do what they like, or is it all just a tool to change that's going off in the world and different things are making me do different things, but it's all just kind of like consequential happening where there's no freedom, which a bundle of states
So now the worry is a different one. Now the worry is if it's just mental and physical states causing all these things that are happening, do I have any free will? What does it mean to say, I mean, and that's a big question. I mean, let's get to the theory of karma. That's a big question for the Buddhists. That, how are we going to talk about, I've got these questions on your handout. I haven't gotten to the texts yet, and I just realized an hour is almost over. So I've got these questions after the text. So let's address this issue after, when we look at the texts. We read some Buddhist texts, get a flavor of what they're trying to say, and then try and answer these questions. Who's the agent? Who's the experiencer? Why should we believe in something like karma? You are going to suffer on account of your deeds. So I'll give you a 5-minute break, 7-minute break at this point, and we'll start again in a little bit. So just relax, and then we'll read some fascinating Buddhist texts, I think.